There have been a lot of big name games that have been coming out this year and will come out later in the year, but honestly, Monster Train 2 is a game that I have been looking forwards to for a while. I've always been a big fan of deck builders ever since I played the game Dominion way back in the day, and of course, games like Slay the Spire really brought them into the mainstream, but I've always been fond of Monster Train in particular, and I think that Monster Train 2 does nothing but improve upon the original in just about every way. Now, while this game is pretty light on story, I do think that there are some surprises and gameplay elements worth putting in a slight spoiler warning for. So the way I'm going to structure this is I'm going to give my quick thoughts about the game up front, and then later on I'll go more in depth and in detail as to what I like about this, talking about more complex and in-depth gameplay systems and whatnot. So yeah, to start, if I haven't made it clear already, I clearly really enjoy this game. Like, what I think I like about Monster Train more than other games of this kind in, like, the deck-building roguelike genre is that, like, most other games of this sort have you control just a singular character, with your deck representing a number of different attacks and abilities that character can perform. But in Monster Train, it almost has a sort of tower defense element to it, where you're playing a bunch of, well, monsters on a train, and they all attack passively each turn, and you can buff them with spells or cast damaging cards on your enemies and stuff like that. Like, it kinda plays like Magic the Gathering in a sense, like if you squint really hard, but in this new sequel, they've added just about more of everything. Like, there's new factions, new upgrades, new events, entire new types of cards. Like, now you can play room cards, which modify everything on that floor of your train, and you can equip your monsters with equipment cards too, keeping in mind, of course, that Monster Train has a very free-form upgrade system that I love, where you can equip basically any creature with virtually any two upgrades of your choice. Then you can combine equipment cards to put two equipment on that same upgraded monster, allowing you to create some, like, really devastating combos. And, like, another new system that I really like that they added in this one is that you're now given a full turn to deploy your units before the combat starts, and you can build around that system to make sure that you get all of your most important and powerful units out right away before you have to worry about drawing them from your deck. So if you play into it right, you can add a ton of consistency even if you have a lot of cards, which I think makes it way more viable to have builds where you have larger decks. But yeah, it's also worth pointing out, before I move on to the more in-depth game mechanics, this game only costs like $25 base, and you can get it 10% off if you own the first game, or, weirdly enough, you can also get that 10% off deal if you own Balatro. In a world where studios are trying to force $70 and $80 games on us, it really is refreshing to have a game like this come out that I can easily play for hundreds of hours at still have it at such a good low price. I mean, I've already put over 40 hours into it, and I still feel like I'm scratching the surface with just how much content it has. But if I haven't convinced you to buy it just yet, allow me to indulge myself by talking about some of the game's mechanics more in depth, because yeah, there is a lot to talk about here. One thing that I think the sequel improves upon a lot is just the factions themselves. The first game's factions were perfectly good on their own for sure, but I feel like they kind of played into some pretty standard card game archetypes. Like, stop if you've heard this one before. The red faction in Monster Train 1 is focused around high damaging monsters and spells. The green faction has much more durable creatures and lots of buffing spells. The totally not blue faction, that just so happens to be water themed, is focused around spell casting more than creatures, and so on and so forth. Like, the comparisons to Magic the Gathering, I think, only becomes more obvious in this regard, at least when talking about the factions from the first game, but like I said, this doesn't make the older factions bad per se, it's just that they hardly break the mold, and I think that what makes the sequel factions so much more interesting to me is that they play into some of the more unique mechanics of Monster Train a lot more. Like, take the first faction for example, just the Banished. Their main faction gimmick is a buff called Valor, which they have a variety of ways of applying. Every stack of Valor on a unit gives it +1 attack, which is simple enough and nice on its own, but if the unit is at the front of that floor, then they also get armor equal to their valor that refreshes automatically at the end of every turn, making them really durable as well. And then on top of that, the starting spell for that faction also moves that unit to the front of the floor when you cast it on them. So this faction plays around with the positioning aspect of the game a lot, and you can do things like moving units out of harm's way to protect them and stuff like that. You can even use that Valor spell on enemies so that you can say take the enemy healer, move it to the front of the floor, and then make it easier to attack them. So you can use a lot of these cards in very unorthodox ways as well. And like right off the bat, that just makes the first faction feel a lot more unique and in-depth to me than just using things like the standard Magic the Gathering colors as templates. And there's still 4 other factions that I could talk about. And I mean, like, I won't go into detail about all of them, but I'll at least talk about one more, like the Pyreborn faction, which is the Dragon faction. And they have a lot of unique mechanics of their own. Like, for one, their basic damage spell has a bit of a twist to it, where it only actually does 1 damage, but it applies stacks of Pyregel. And every stack of Pyregel on a unit causes it to take extra damage equal to the number of stacks any time that they take damage for any reason. So if you have a unit that attacks a bunch of times, or if you have a bunch of low damage spells, or even some things like thorns or poison or anything, like all of that triggers the Pyregel damage. So it has a ton of combo potential with mechanics from other factions. But on top of that, they also have lots of ways of generating extra money mid-combat with Avarice units, which is of course nice for visiting shops and clearing out their inventory between fights, but they also have certain cards and abilities that can actually spend money mid-combat for extra effects. So they actually turn the entire money mechanic of the game into an extra combat resource. And then on top of that, they also have a unique meta progression mechanic where you can amass Dragon's treasures from various cards and abilities, and these can be saved up between fights and eventually cashed in to gain extra money and artifacts, some of which are wholly unique to this system. And there's still 3 more factions that I haven't talked about yet that I think all have similar levels of depth to these. But wait, I hear you say, what if I still prefer the original game's factions? And sure, I personally like all of these new factions way more, but I could totally understand why someone might like the older, more straightforward factions more. But oh boy, do I have good news for you, because this is the main thing that I thought was worth putting up a spoiler warning for. Because once you progress a little ways into the story, you actually unlock all 5 of the first game's original factions in this game as well, which means that this game has an insane 10 factions to play as. And like, that's one of my other favorite things about Monster Train, which is the fact that you don't just pick one of these factions, you actually get to mix and match any 2 factions of your choice every time you start a run. Like, in most of these sorts of games, you only just pick a specific character or class to play as, and that's great and all, but it only gives you a handful of options to start each run with. Monster Train allowing you to combine any 2 factions not only allows you to come up with some wild synergies, but with all 10 factions in the game now, keeping in mind that choosing which faction is your primary faction matters, since that's the one that gives you your champion, that's 90 different possible combinations of any 2 factions. Then you can double that, because every faction has 2 options to pick from that change what champion and starting cards you get. So that's 180 possible starting configurations. Technically even more if you count the fact that you can change out your secondary faction's starting cards as well. And even then, you also have the new Pyre Heart system, where you can change out your train's Pyre, and that basically acts, like that's your universal health pool. But you can essentially equip like weaker versions of it that have less health or attack power in exchange for getting more powerful abilities and passives that you can use in addition to all of your cards and factions and stuff, like the ability to heal the units on your train or get extra mana once per fight and stuff like that. Having this many options for configuring your runs really makes it hard to get tired of this game, because there's just so many possible ways to play it. If you get bored of one faction, you could probably play 100 runs, all using different combinations of factions before you cycle back to it. I mean, there's an unlockable in this game that actually requires you to beat the game not only on its hardest difficulty, but to do so with every possible combination of factions, which is just wild that they actually put that in the game. So if you really want to go for it, I feel like the developer wasn't lying when he said that this game has potentially well over 1,000 hours of content. So yeah, I think that if you like card games and deck builders, and if you want a game that you can easily keep playing runs in for possibly years and years, then I think Monster Train 2 is the game for you. And if you like the first one, I find it hard to imagine a scenario where you don't somehow enjoy the sequel at least as much, if not more, than the original. But, as always, I'm happy to continue the conversation in the comments down below. Let me know what your thoughts are on Monster Train 1 and 2, and if you've found any fun synergies of your own, I love seeing what kind of crazy things people pull off in these sorts of games. I'm a huge fan of combining the proliferation mechanic of the Underlegion with Lazarus's potion crafting, and I mean, I just can't get enough of the Lunar Coven spell buffing conduit system being mixed with the damage boosting Pyre Gel from the Pyreborn faction to create spells that could just do literally hundreds of points of damage per cast. Like, it's just great. But yeah, I think that will do it for today. So as usual, if you like the video, make sure to leave me a like, and if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to give me a subscribe and ring that bell. But thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.